Yep, it's going to be another Harriet Burns related episode because I love miniatures, I love models, and probably the best models that you'll ever see in a Disneyland park is the exclusive Storybook Canals here at Disneyland, where today we're going to learn all about how these real miniature buildings were created. They're not models, they're real buildings, just at a smaller scale. Let's dive in and see once again how Disneyland was built. Now, you may remember Harriet Burns from my Matterhorn video because she is one of the early female Imagineers and one that had a heavy hand in sculpting out Disneyland. She was the model maker for the Matterhorn, and she was also the model maker for the Storybook Canal boats. Now, one of the earlier parts of the Disneyland story that I love are the financial struggles and how everything was kind of built on a budget because they were building everything at once. And when they were working on the details of the Storybook homes, the models, there was a cast member that said, "Why are we working so hard on details that no one will ever notice? No one will ever know if we cut corners." Walt replied, "I'll know." I love that attention to detail. It is what makes Disneyland so special. Friends, Bricky here. What do you say we explore one of the most detail-oriented attractions that exists? So even though technically, yes, this is an opening day attraction, when it opened up July 17th, 1955, it was nothing like what we see today. The model shop was overworked and just didn't have time to build all the little houses and vignettes that we would see when we would travel around its many canals. They had time to make the canals, had time to make boats that were way too noisy, and the guests could hardly hear over the sound of the motors for the boats. It needs to be a pretty serene experience to work, but they did get it open on opening day, but you just drove around, or shall I say, floated around mud banks. And the only thing that you saw were various different weeds and regular plants you would find in California. But Walt, being creative, decided, what if we put signs next to all the different weeds that have their Latin names so people feel like they're seeing something exotic, even though it's probably what they could find in their own backyards. Love that P.T. Barnum mindset that sometimes Walt would pull out when in a pinch. So what we know today as one of the most beautifully landscaped attractions that exist in any Disney park on planet Earth was nicknamed by the Imagineering team Mudbank Ride. What a glow up. So 1 year later in 1956, the attraction would reopen as we know it today with models that are at 1/25th scale. And this is where it gets interesting. They're not just models, they're actually real little homes. The idea was if we build these like models, they will deteriorate, they won't be able to withstand the outdoors. Since we're building real buildings that will have to survive outside 24 hours a day, 365 days out of the year for as many years as possible, we have to build these like real little homes. So every building that you see inside of the Storybook Canals was built like your home, the one that you're maybe watching from right now. All real building materials were used to erect these little 1/25th wonders of magic. And that was a bee that just flew right into my face. When talking about the construction of the attraction, Ken Anderson said just because everything was small didn't mean that they were necessarily easy to build. When working on the attraction, Disney Imagineering had to grade the ground to lay all the electrical wiring beneath the surface. So therefore, every time you ride by one of these little houses that has its windows on or a street lamp out front, that's wiring that runs beneath the Earth's surface all throughout the entire attraction. So we never see one cable attached to any of the buildings. And I think one of the best parts about this attraction's landscaping is that everything is real. Walt did not want anything to be fake. Everything had to be done in the manner of a full-scale house because these houses would never disappear. They were meant to be permanent structures that would stay outside all year long. So Disney Imagineering would end up using real wood siding and fiberglass on many of the structures. The buildings were made of marine plywood or redwood, covered with a fiberglass so that it could survive the outdoor elements. The roofs and brick chimneys were modeled out of fiberglass and joined to the houses. Disney Imagineering even considered little details like the thatch roofs would need to have a clear plastic coating over them so that birds wouldn't try to steal the straw to make their nests. They used metal and concrete to lay the foundations so that they would resist rot from moisture. And each little house or shop that you see on the attraction has openings so that air can circulate through the building to prevent any sort of mildew. Walt Disney Imagineering worked tirelessly, doing hundreds of tests to find the right transparent dye to get the tiny plastic stained glass windows accurate. When the buildings were finished and painted, they put in the landscaping, miniature trees, shrubs, and tiny mountains. Everything had to be miniature because an inch is a foot. So where do you find small redwoods that would stay small? Imagineering found a place up north in San Francisco called Van Dam State Park. There was a redwood forest in an area where the redwoods had starved to death because there wasn't enough sunlight for them to grow. They were on a platform of a rock, so they were lucky enough to find real redwood trees that they could bring back to Disneyland. So finding small trees, small shrubs, that I understand, but they also had to go out of their way to find incredibly small flowers because an inch is a foot. How many flowers do you see where the buds are 1 foot in diameter? So think about this. They had to try to find stuff that would not only grow in Anaheim, but would grow and stay at the scale of 1/25th. Unbelievable. Another one of the creative challenges with Storybook Land is that each building is from a different country. So there has to be many different architectural styles, but everything has to look like it's been there for some time and age naturally. So that every building that would actually be from a style all around the world looks like it's somehow blended through time with all of its counterparts. So when you see the stained glass that they worked so hard on, know that it's real wrought iron that they are attached to in the tiny little grates that give them their patterns. When completed, the Storybook Land Canal boats were exciting enough to be given the first D-ticket designation costing 35 cents a ride. Imagineering was so happy with the work that was done in the Storybook Land that in 1983 they decided this needed to be the look for Fantasyland. Fantasyland, like all of Disneyland in '55, was built on the cheap. Imagineering knew there was a better way to do Fantasyland than the Renaissance Fair look that they had agreed upon. So Storybook Land actually inspired Fantasyland to tell a better story in 1983, which gave Imagineer Ken Anderson a chance to build a real-world version of Pinocchio, as he'd been the art director of the animated version, and also the lead art director on Snow White. So Ken Anderson, who worked on Pinocchio, was able to rebuild Pinocchio's house. I pointed because Pinocchio is literally walking by me right now. He's doing laps. But imagine that you are tasked to make a building or a set for a movie, and then you get to build a real version of that. That's what Fantasyland 1983 was, a real version of all the movies that they had depicted, not a cheap one-year turnaround version. And that vision comes from this attraction. I do love, though, that the Storybook Land that we float through inspired the Storybook Land that we get to walk through. I think it shows the true progression of the park, how they realize that every idea has room for improvement and every idea deserves the attention to detail to make it as best as possible. I don't know when the last time that you've rode this attraction is. I put it off, don't do it a lot. But for this video, I have now floated through here several times, rode past it on the rails of Casey Jr., and it is just absolutely hard to beat the detail, the storytelling, the design, the sculpture that is the Storybook Land. An exclusive to our park, something that they would probably never build again, but something I can guarantee you will never go away. Absolute perfect Disneyland attraction. Well, friends, like most great days at Disneyland, we end where we begin. I hope you enjoyed floating around the Storybook Canal with me and looking at some of the details of this attraction. There are so many more about the Storybook Land so much more about Fantasyland, so much more about Ken Anderson, Harriet Burns, Walt Disney, but we'll save those for another video. If you want to see more videos about how Disneyland was made, make sure you check out this playlist right here, where I'm slowly trying to tell you the complete history of all the design details of how Disneyland was crafted and constructed. Thank you so much for showing up. Consider subscribing to the channel. Please check out the playlist. See you real soon.